Two LSU Tigers are planning to enter the transfer portal, and LSU's new OC has a new deal. We'll talk about that and more today on the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. And welcome everyone to the newest edition of the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. Appreciate you listening in. As always, hopefully you're having a great Thursday, and it is a 3 and out edition. And we got a lot to get to. No doubt in my mind, we got a ton to talk about. And we're going to start things off with, I think, the elephant in the room, and that is regarding LSU having one of their quarterbacks actually saying he's headed out, and that is Juwan Johnson, a high school player out of Lafayette Christian Academy, a heck of a player in high school. Hasn't necessarily been able to show his ability as a passer. He's only thrown one pass in 2 seasons at LSU. He's used as out of the backfield as a runner, but lo and behold, Juwan Johnson, and here's the thing, this felt inevitable in a way. Because if you had been paying attention to him on social media over the last few days, he had kind of been not complaining, but just saying, hey, I want to get my shot. I want to get my opportunity. But there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, especially, and it's always the case, is when you have a head coach getting fired, a new guy comes in, he's going to want to play with his toys. I think that, the kid out of Ole Miss, Trinidad Chambliss, he can very well make the jump over. Heck, even with recent news surrounding the Michigan Wolverines, with Sherrone Moore getting fired for cause, he is going to have his quarterback, Bryce Underwood. He could very well be entering the transfer portal, and Lane Kiffin could get that top guy that LSU was absolutely chomping at the bit to get. So there's like a lot of uncertainty in that quarterback room. And I think Juwan Johnson wants to show his mettle, especially as a QB. And you have to respect that. And it's true that I think there's going to be a new preference when it comes to what this program wants in a quarterback. He was a 4-star prospect out of high school at LSU. He was in that recruiting class. He was the number 9 overall player in the entire state of Louisiana. That was a pretty stacked recruiting class, if I remember correctly. That said, you got to think, if you're like, man, what is going on with this transfer portal? Thankfully, not a whole lot of other guys have made their intentions known. In a sense, they haven't made their intentions entirely known when it comes to their decision to enter the transfer portal. Another one that did was Sadir Mitchell. He plans to enter the portal. He said on TikTok Live, I'm going to be real. I didn't leave the team, bro. People come to disagreements, but it wasn't hard feelings. It was his decision. It was BK's. He felt like the decision wasn't fair for the team, even though it had nothing to do with the team. That's how he felt. And he felt like he was forced out of the team by BK. And now he's going to enter the portal. And he thought that, he was going to have a shot at getting a spot on LSU's roster with the change in regime. Well, that did not happen. And he made very little impact with LSU. So it's going to be, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of people that do miss him. But I do have to say, we'll stick with LSU football for a minute, because I was kind of surprised at this, is the fact that LSU football, in a way, and this is interesting, when you look at LSU football, the offensive coordinator position, this is where I was kind of surprised to see Charlie Weiss Jr., according to reports, there is a new deal in place for the Tigers' new offensive coordinator. I think Wilson Alexander was the first one to kind of break this news. He agreed originally to a 3-year, $6 million deal back in late November, just as the calendar was flipping over to December. It was a $6 million deal, going to pay him out $2.5 million annually. Excuse me. It was 3 years, $6 million, so $2 million a year. That deal's been amended, but there's an interesting twist. It's a 3-year, $7.5 million deal, $2.5 million a year. But according to it, there is a look-in period clause where his compensation will be reviewed at the end of each season and shall be adjusted if necessary, so that his annual compensation for the remainder of the term of his employment exceeds the highest annual compensation for any active SEC offensive coordinator, excluding incentives. That is kind of crazy. And I think this also speaks to trying to retain these guys, because, again, you look at what the history of Lane Kiffin has been. I mean, he was doing pretty good at Ole Miss, and now he's splitting. You don't want him to split before the season even starts. And there's another clause in there that says, if he leaves and takes another job prior to April 1st of next year, he will be responsible for paying back LSU 300% of the salary. If he never coaches a game at LSU, if he goes back to Ole Miss or anywhere else, he has to pay a massive amount of money. But I am intrigued by the look-in clause. And I'm going to go a little bit more in the weeds here, because this is the first thing I thought about when I saw this news from Wilson Alexander. And it's right in my wheelhouse, and I'll explain why in a minute. Because I'm a big wrestling fan, have been for a long time. And this was back in the 90s when WCW was running wild and they were spending all kinds of money. Kevin Nash had a contract in his contract stipulation where if somebody, like let's say Hulk Hogan, he got paid more, they would get an immediate bump up in pay to make sure they are the highest paid person. Literally, the contract was written out. It was called a favored nations clause, was what that was said to be in the contract for Kevin Nash. And that was really one of the big reasons why WCW folded. But that's a different point of contention. But it's interesting because when you look at this look-in period, and has a chance to become the highest paid SEC offensive coordinator, regardless of anybody else getting that distinction, his price will immediately go up. And I think there's plenty incentive for him to stick around. Because again, the big news from Wednesday has to be Sherrone Moore. And that's across the nation. Everybody's been talking about it. Sherrone Moore, if you've been under a rock, Sherrone Moore actually got in some serious trouble, to say the least, regarding some illicit things. In fact, he got detained by police after being fired after 2 years with the Michigan Wolverines. And this is all coming because he, quote unquote, engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a staff member. Further specifics are unknown at this time. And again, that's zero tolerance. Huge problem for Michigan. And there are people out there that are going to say this. And Lane Kiffin more or less shot this down pretty much immediately. But I'm going to second that motion because I saw somebody bring this up, and I wanted to just put my head in hands when I saw this. And I will say it every single time his name is brought up. Somebody, and probably several others, have said Kalen DeBoer going over to Michigan, Lane Kiffin goes to Alabama, Ed Orgeron to LSU. Let's get wild was one of the posts. And I said, no, we are not doing this. We are done. We are completely 1,000,000% done with Ed Orgeron. I'm sorry. He's not coming back, and he shouldn't come back. Why would you bring back somebody that caused this much strife? Even though he won a national championship, as soon as he won the national championship, it's like he sold his soul to the devil in some Faustus agreement, and that program suffered tremendously. Is Ed O a hell of a recruiter? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't want to bring him back. Anyway, no matter what, I feel like he is the one person, if I had any sort of control about how things are done over at LSU, if Ed Orgeron's even sniffing a opportunity at this program, I'd probably fire whoever throws that idea out there. Simply because he's the one that got you in this place in the first place. He got you in this position where you had to hire Brian Kelly, and that did not work out at all. Lo and behold, here we are 4 years later. Ed Orgeron got fired back in 2021. 2021, Ed Orgeron got fired. And now people are saying, let's get him back to LSU. And I understand some of these guys and gals are saying it ironically, but I feel like y'all don't realize y'all have short-term memory loss. Something's wrong with you where you think that that's going to be the answer. If anybody at LSU even is thinking that idea in an unironic fashion, I think they need to have their head examined and have a few more things kind of done with their brain. It needs to be donated to science, because I don't understand the amount of damage and brain rot you have to think that that would be the right idea for this program right here, right now. You've got to start setting up for the future. If you're LSU, and I think Lane Kiffin is going to stick around unless we see something completely wacky. I don't think Kalen DeBoer jumps over to Michigan. I think he's going to be like, yeah, I'm good here over at Alabama. That said, it is a little bit interesting, just a wee bit intriguing to say the least. And we'll wrap things up because I saw this on Twitter earlier, and it sucks because I'm a huge baseball fan. I love college baseball. Here in Louisiana, we love it, right? And Chase Morgan, a ace for the Louisiana region Cajuns baseball program, he is out indefinitely. This is coming from a extremely reliable source, Kendall Rogers. He's been over at Cajuns games many a year. He's from Texas, so he makes a trip over there every now and again. And he's one of the top draft prospects. And apparently he's going to be out indefinitely. And his return for the 2026 season, which can be starting in February, is TBD after dealing with some nagging back issues that could require further treatment. He's, without a doubt, one of those guys that would be an ace for a lot of major league programs in about 2 to 3 years if he stays healthy. Just is an absolute beast. Last year had 13 starts, 3.52 ERA, 74 strikeouts, 24 walks. It's a hell of a ratio, to say the least, but it's a tough break to see for that young man. I'd say, let me swap backs with him, but, I wouldn't want to deal with that nagging pain, and hopefully he has a speedy recovery. Definitely gonna be thinking about that young man over the next few weeks as we get closer to college baseball season. Hot take, I am probably a much bigger fan of that than I am of college basketball, but I am definitely getting excited as the days progress over towards conference play, because that's gonna be whenever I really start to pivot and make that flip over to the conversation regarding college basketball. Obviously, Tulane's going to be in the college football playoff next week. Cajuns have a bowl game. LSU has a bowl game. But we're definitely going to try and start trickling in more college basketball talk as we kind of proceed to give you what you need, because football is more or less wrapped up, right? One more game for LSU. The Cajuns, maybe one more for Tulane. If they pull off a massive upset, we could be talking about them in the quarters, which would be really cool. But I think we need to start making that pivot and moving it forward when it comes to the conversation regarding LSU men's basketball, Cajuns men's basketball, even women's basketball. That's kind of another thing I'm looking forward to getting into. And I'll end with this. I was talking about the Cajuns baseball team. I do want to talk briefly about the Cajuns women's basketball team, because it has been a long non-conference and they have been just itching for a victory. And it feels like we're not going to get one for a minute. Cajuns will be starting off conference play on December 17th against Texas State. And they are currently with a big old goose egg. And again, some of those wins, some of those losses were somewhat justified. You played number 2 Texas, Memphis, but losing to Nichols, losing to East Texas A&M, it's not a great look in any way, shape, or form. And I feel like, Gary Broadhead's been there for a long time. I've never had a bad experience talk with Gary as the head coach of the Louisiana Raging Cajuns during my time in the media realm. I do think, though, it is time to at least have that tough conversation when it comes to Gary Broadhead, and I think this will be his final season. I don't think we're going to see what happened around this time last year with Gary getting Das Boot before the calendar flips over to 2026. I think Gary might just be like, you know what? If you want me to go on the retirement tour, I'll gladly go on the retirement tour. Appreciate you listening in to the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. We'll talk to you tomorrow as we kind of kick off the weekend. And we give you a little preview of what's going on with the New Orleans Saints and their matchup against the Carolina Panthers. With those sharp teeth and claws, can the Saints make it 2 in a row? I'm sure many fans would hope not. We'll talk about that and more on the next Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast.